Welcome to another video from the Fisherman's Net and Saints Peter and Paul in Naperville, Illinois. In these videos we've been looking at the sacramental economy, or God's work on our behalf through the sacraments. And we've been looking at the idea of the sacraments as outward signs. All the sacraments have outward signs, things that appeal to our senses, like bread and wine and water and oil and the laying on of hands. And we've asked, well, why this stress on matter, on stuff, on outward signs? And we saw in our last video that, well, it has to do with who God is as God incarnate, that God has taken on flesh, has taken on matter in order to save us. And it has to do with who we are as a radical union of body and soul. And so that spiritual realities are communicated to us through physical channels. But now we want to push even further out and ask that question again, why matter? Why stuff? Why outward signs in our worship? And we can actually say that one of the foundations of the sacraments is creation. That if we ask the question, why sacraments? One of the answers is, well, because God creates sacramentally. Sacrament is how God does creation. Now we have to take sacrament in a very broad, generic sense here. Let's take sacrament and use it in its most generic sense as an outward, visible sign of an inward, invisible reality. And so that, of course, fits the 7 sacraments. We have an outward, visible sign in baptism, water, that signifies and makes present an inward, invisible reality, the forgiveness of sins, the giving of sanctifying grace. So if we understand sacraments in that first and most broad sense, outward signs of invisible realities, well then all of creation is sacramental. Now here we want to make a distinction. This is sacramental with a small s. Of course this isn't the 7 sacraments. But there's a principle that is kind of common to it all. That all of creation, everything visible we see around us, is a visible sign of an invisible reality. That is to say, all of creation points to the invisible God, its creator. Creation, everything around us, is kind of like looking at a painting by Vincent van Gogh and knowing something about the painter, Vincent van Gogh. It's a sign of the painter behind it. All of creation is the same way. With those for eyes to see it, creation has God's fingerprints all over it. We see this in the Old Testament, in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 18, where the psalmist says, "The heavens show forth the glory of God." And here when he says this, the heavens show forth the glory of God, the heavens simply means the skies. If we look to the heavens, it shows forth the glory of God. So the heavens shows forth the glory of God, and the firmament declares the work of his hands. That's Psalm 18:2. So the psalmist is saying just looking at the night sky is an outward sign of an invisible reality. The work of God is a sign of God's presence. St. Paul takes this same idea up in the New Testament right at the beginning of his letter to the Romans. In Romans 1:20 he says that the invisible things of God, right, the invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, his eternal power and his divinity. So here St. Paul is saying, just by looking at creation, you don't need the revelation, say, given to the Jews, or even to the Christians, to know that God exists in his power and his divinity, that creation itself is an outward sign of that reality. There's a more contemporary description of this, or expression of this, in the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, when he says that the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like that of ooze of oil crushed. So Gerard Manley Hopkins says the world is charged with the grandeur of God. This is the same idea that the heavens declare the glory of God, that God's creation shows his invisible power and deity. Gerard Manley Hopkins says the world is charged with the grandeur of God. So all of this is to say that if we look at sacraments, sacramentalism, in that broad sense of an outward sign of an invisible reality, all of creation fits. All of creation should be for us a sign of God's power and glory and might and love. The problem is, since the fall, since original sin has entered in, we've lost our sacramental glasses. We no longer naturally and easily see the Creator present in the creation. Our sinful fallenness sees creation in isolation from the Creator, or creation actually can hide the Creator from our sinful selves. So what we need, as those who have fallen and lost our sacramental glasses, is we need a school of sacramentality. We need a place where the signs and symbols of God's presence are so thick that we can't miss them. And that's our liturgy. Those are our sacraments. A place where the sacramentality of creation is concentrated to its utmost degree in the 7 sacraments. And so things like bread and wine and water and oil and the laying on of hands, now in this setting, connote to us God's invisible presence, the reality of his work. And not just the things used immediately in the sacraments, but everything around us. Consider the architecture of our church. At our church, Saints Peter and Paul, we have those big statues of angels in the sanctuary. That is, in a way, with a small s, sacramental. It's an outward sign of an invisible reality, that the angels and saints are truly present at the Eucharist. So those statues and paintings of the angels and saints are not merely decoration, but they're to remind us that we've stepped into a place where the sacramentality of all creation is focused and concentrated. And the hope is when we leave the liturgy, we've regained our sacramental glasses so we can see God's presence in all of creation, so that with the psalmist we can look to the heavens and say that the firmament declares the work of God.